So I thought I would start on a little project. I've always been fascinated with electronics and robotics. I thought it would be fun to try and make a robot, an autonomous robot, one that would drive around on its own and make its own decisions and be able to move from room to room on its own without not a remote control car. And that's a big project, and I've had a lot of missteps in the past attempting this, and usually I get hung up with the mechanics, and probably in a future video I'll show you some of these other attempts that I've made. And I've decided to take a different approach. I thought I would just grab one of these cheap little robotics bases that you can get off eBay or Amazon or whatever. Okay, so let's just have a look at what these kits provide when you order one. So you've got obviously your four wheels, and you've got your two plastic plates here, and you've got a little protective paper on it, so you can just peel that off if you want. It actually takes a little bit of time, so it's if you want to get a feel for it first, I'd recommend doing like a dry fit first with the plastic on or with the paper on it, and then afterwards assembling it for good afterwards. I kind of like it though with the paper off. It looks pretty cool, even with a few scratches, and you're going to scratch it up anyway, so don't get too caught up on it. And then you get a bag of parts and motors and things. This is where the cool stuff is. There are instructions. They're kind of vague and somewhat not very useful, but they'll get you going. The big thing with it is, okay, so well, we have the motors. We have these little bag of parts, which are basically your standoffs. So you've got these brass standoffs here, which just separate the two plates. And it gives a bit of room here for the motors to fit in. And you can see there's a bit of a gap here between the motor and the top plate. So the motor actually fits with these two little motor mounts on the bottom plate here. And that's what's in this bag. There's these little standoffs. And all you do is you take a screw and you put it through, mount it onto here like that, and then you fit it in there, and that's what keeps it actually on the plastic. So you can see it right here. You see, two screws, and then it sort of fits through this hole in the bottom plate. And the last piece are these. These are shaft encoders, and I'll talk about these. These are going to be very important later. They're quite fragile when you're putting them in. Be careful. I'll show you some tricks maybe on a later video on how to install these without cracking them. But these little shaft encoders go on the back side of the motor shaft. So you can see you've got one side here where you can actually place the wheel. It's just a pressure fit. See, it's got a little key on it, so you can just fit that on there and fit it in there. But the other side is where your shaft encoder is going to go. And when that comes through here, you can place an LED on both sides of this, an LED transmitter and receiver. And as the motor turns, light will go through these little tiny holes, and it'll let you know that the wheel's actually turning. So when you're trying to control your motors, you want to know that the wheel is actually turning and that it hasn't just frozen, or that it's not behaving properly. So before you assemble it, one thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to solder some wires onto here. These are very small little tabs for soldering, but you can do it. Don't bend them too much; they'll probably break off. And you don't need a very heavy gauge wire for this. It's just something light. It's not drawing a whole lot of current, so don't get too hung up on it. So that's basically the kit, and it's pretty cut and dry for putting it together. Maybe on a later video I'll actually put together a second one. The reason I have multiple of these is I actually picked up 4 of these, but the motivation is once I get the software working, I want to be able to have these guys coordinate. So that's part of the goal here, is I can have 2 or 3 of these robots going around the house or wherever and have them coordinate on different tasks. And also it's nice to have some extra parts, because I'm sure these are pretty cheap and things are going to break. So that's the kit. Let's just get that out of the way. when you're looking for these kits on eBay or wherever, one thing you'll notice is that there's a variety of different types. Some of them have two-wheeled. Well, they all have. Well, no. Some have two wheels. Some have four wheels, but not all of them have four motors. And I wanted to have four motors because it allows you to do steering a little bit better. The other configuration that you'll see, particularly with, I think, from the same vendor who makes this one, is two motors, two wheels in the back, and then a little, just a little pivot wheel for the front, like a little swivel wheel. And that works fine, but when you want to steer one of these with a swivel wheel, you have to control from the back wheels. And if you notice, you've got a big swing up here when you're trying to move only by the back wheel. So if I want to go for a 90-degree angle, so let's say I'm here and I want to go this direction, I've got to turn like this and then move. Right? So now I've got to recalculate based on where I am, as opposed to moving both of these wheels, and I can basically turn on the spot. So minor thing, but I think later that's going to make the math a little bit easier for trying to figure out where I am and trying to understand my position in the room. So that's why I went with this one. And then there's a bunch of other little mounting things on here for boards and batteries and sensors and lots of other stuff. So these are great, seem to be great little kits. Actually power it up and do some stuff with it. So something like some batteries, an Arduino, which is going to give us some basic ability to program this thing. Then we need some sort of motor controller. This is a simple little motor controller for two motors. It's an H-bridge configuration. So I'll need two of these for two motors. There are shields I can get, which will do that as well. But I like the idea of this one just because I can use it for other purposes. There's things like ultrasonic transducers and transmitters, so I can put that up front and or on back and find out relative distances to objects. Photoresistors, so CDS cells basically to look for light. We can put that on there. Maybe a little status display just to let us know how things are going, battery health, and that sort of stuff. I mentioned that these shaft encoder wheels are here, and then these are the sort of transmitters and receivers. This has an LED on one side and a photo transistor on the other side, and they happen to fit in very nicely right here. So you can see this thing is designed for this. And if I have one of these on each wheel, then I can find out that each wheel is actually moving, and I ideally be able to figure out which angle I'm at and where I'm facing. Another way to tackle that, of course, is to have a compass chip on here or an accelerometer where I can find out where I physically am in the world with a proper magnetic reading. But we'll explore that later because I'm not sure how accurate they are indoors or if there's any sort of issues with surrounding objects and that sort of thing. So it'll be an interesting little experiment. If we need a little bit more memory, you can get these little SD card readers, which will communicate with the Arduino. So lots of little bells and whistles. And the nice thing about getting into robotics at this stage is that this stuff would normally be a big pain to have to deal with otherwise. But now it's become such a commodity that the technology is just, these are like $2 each, $1 each, $1 each, on eBay. And, and then maybe $10 for an Arduino. So you can really get into the hobby relatively cheap and start playing around with some kind of high-level stuff. So, and there's even kits out there that basically include all of these pieces all together. So it's a great way to get going. So that's our introduction. That's sort of where we're going to start. And as time goes on, I'll try to explain some of the goals. But the first thing I think we need to do is just put some power on some of this stuff and make these things turn and find out. And maybe we'll just focus on motor controller with wheels and get some basic motion going. And then from there, we'll try and get smart. Thanks, and we'll talk to you again soon.